Good morning, everyone. My name is Ramsay Brown. I'm the co-founder and chief operations officer of Boundless Mind, technology startup from Venice, California. So Riga's a little far from home for me, but I'd like to thank you all for having me here and thank my girlfriend and grandmother and mom for staying up till midnight to watch this live stream. When we think about the loss of free will and whether or not humans can stay in charge, it feels like we've done an a priori that humans had free will to begin with. And I'm not going to try to make a stance on this immediately, but as a conversational prop, I'm going to pull in one of my intellectual forefathers, Frederick Skinner, a Harvard academic, who was the radical behavioral scientist who pioneered behaviorism, along with the work of Olds and Milner and other of his colleagues. If Skinner is remembered not just for his controversial science, he's remembered for his extremely controversial thoughts around philosophy, especially around the role of human free will and autonomy, as he laid out for us in his seminal work, Beyond Freedom and Dignity. From this perspective of understanding what he'd seen in behaviorism, where the animal, human included, guides its behavior through stimuli it receives from its internal and external environment, free will seemed like a bit of an odd thing to him. We are these machines shaped by our genes, what we sense inside of ourselves, and what we sense in our external world. We remember Skinner for the work he did on Pigeons as his model system, by which he pioneered operant conditioning and understanding why it is that pain and pleasure, especially pleasure, for all the talk about dopamine from yesterday's neuroeconomists, why should it be that reinforcement, positivity, that little burst of dopamine, shapes our behavior? While he worked on Pigeons, we see ourselves today caught in Skinner boxes of our own design. We are the pigeons in our systems. I think this is extremely pertinent for strategic communications. And as we go from pigeons to people, I understand that from the academic neuroscience perspective, of which I had the pleasure of training at University of Southern California for a little while, there's some assumptions I get to make about why it's intuitive that we can say things about pigeons' behavior or rats' behavior and why they mean something to humans, but I don't want to make some assumptions as an academic about what everyone else knows as well. What you're seeing above is a flattened out schematic representation of the architecture of the central nervous system. Imagine this like unfurling the brain and laying it flat. This is the pioneering work of Dr. Larry Swanson, my close friend and personal and academic mentor, that he pioneered in the 80s, 90s, and through to today. The red lines you see are the structural connectivity we find in the central nervous system, the major axon pathways that are the conduits of information. Think of these as the highways of information that the brain uses to do the computations it's performing to guide your behavior. Below it, we see the same type of map, one for the rat and one for the human. And what I'd like to call attention to is that nothing has really changed in this structural plan other than the proportional representational surface area. Humans have much more cortex here in pink, proportional to the size of our brainstem and our spinal cord. Rats are a little more proportionally representative to each other. Though the differences are there, and these differences account for why I'm giving this talk and a rat isn't, the same underlying wiring that guides our behavior, especially our response to the context of our environment, remains consistent and is testament to our shared genetic heritability. Leaving academia and entering California enterprise software scene and artificial intelligence, my close friend and co-founder, Dr. Thomas Combs, and I recently published a book that I'm actually making available for free to all conference participants. They'll find a way to get you the link or something. That we have seen from the systems neuroscience perspective, from the artificial intelligence perspective, we now can discuss a rigorous technology of human behavior, which now allows us to do design against it. Where strategic communications has previously been about arranging text or arranging text in picture or arranging text in moving picture and sound bite as to influence what happens on the international stage, what I propose to you today is that we are entering a rigorous technology of human behavior, which means that from the strategic communications perspective, human behavior and human motivation states are now a core building block with which you can design policy around. What you'll find in this book, this brief pitch for it, is a brief introduction to 12 tools that we and others in the field have identified by which you can increase, decrease, or modify the frequency of different types of human behaviors, especially in digital contexts. Everyone who's taking their smartphone out to take a picture of this, literally, you're going to get the PDF. It's OK. The one I'd like to speak with you about today is this idea of variable reinforcement, because it so well dovetails with why we see both the global rise of what people call smartphone addiction, a misplaced relationship with their technology, but also because I think it has the most external validity. It's what my team and I have worked on and what our artificial intelligence uses to persuade people to behave differently. And it's what I think has a lot of pertinent to what StratCom is about. In what we call the CAR model, a cue, action, and reward model, people are triggered to start a behavior from a cue they receive from their internal environment, what they feel or think, from their external environment, the smell of donuts over there, or from a synthetic cue, maybe something that a developer or a behavioral designer has placed in their path through some sort of smartphone technology. Then they take an action. There's a thing we would like them to do. And then sometimes, but not every time, they are reinforced for this. This is the critical piece that turns out was the pioneering work of Skinner, that when we do not see the reinforcement coming, it is more likely to increase our future frequency of that behavior. It turns out this variability is wicked hard to get right mathematically. But we were able to do it today. And my team and I look at 4 major trends over the past decade, which is why I can stand in front of you here today and talk about this, and I couldn't a decade ago. The first is that now, for the first time, especially globally, and not just in the post-industrial world, but increasingly the emerging world, overwhelming amount of people are now carrying a omnipresent, always on, always connected supercomputer on their hip at all times. It is sensing their behavior. It is sensing its context. It is sensing their motivational states, where they are, what they're doing, how much they're moving, what they're saying. We're getting increasingly good at systems neuroscience. And while neuroscience has a lot of questions it still needs to answer, ranging from what's underneath depression and Alzheimer's and schizophrenia, to how we use those to increase longevity of populations worldwide, neuroscience has gotten right a few things in the past 10 years, largely through advances in artificial intelligence, and specifically around motivated behavior. Why do we do what we do when it comes to our wants, needs, and how reinforcement shapes those? A lot of recent advances have shed a lot of light there and made it easier to build these types of technologies. The advent of cloud computing has made storage and computing stupid cheap. So what used to take millions of dollars to store or transmit or properly process now can be done by California startups in a garage for pennies on the dollar. And finally, artificial intelligence has now gotten easy enough to work with that an intrepid set of millennials with some elbow grease and a little bit of venture backing can build a system that globally shapes human behavior and wants and needs. This is largely because of a relationship between academia and industry over the past 10 years, in which a lot of people who have been in computer science facilities working at universities have built open source packages. A lot of people at Google and Apple and Microsoft have contributed. And now it's extremely easy to get started very quickly building really advanced predictors or pattern recognizers. These 4 forces converge to mean now I have a machine that is always listening to what I'm doing. Well, mine's sitting over there. You want to have a machine that's always listening to what you're doing, can communicate to the net lickety-split, can store it indefinitely, can compute against it, understands human motivational states at a model level, and has the ability to predict how small interventions into your digital context can shape your future behavior predictably. This is what my team and I do at Boundless Mind. So we run a plug-it-in-and-go behavioral engineering service available globally that allows any piece of technology to increase the future frequency of behavior that someone will perform an action. Consider this the industry practitioner version of what we heard from the neuroeconomists yesterday. We've shown this effective in healthcare, in gaming, in fitness and wellness, in social media contexts, e-commerce, productivity, financial services, and education. I started out life a very, very curious child, learned to code when I was a kid, thought I would grow up and be a physician. God bless my friends who are physicians. I'm clearly not cut out to be a physician. But the idea of being able to build a thing that would have a bit of a global impact and be able to increase the quality of human welfare, and now increasingly in the strategic communications world, is extremely important to my team and I. I'd like to share with you 2 examples of what we've been able to do using this type of technology as a bit of a seed for you going back to your representative institutions to see this is now what the stakes are for changing and persuading how people behave, not just in the laboratory, but in real life. It is the case that there is a growing wave of negativity online, not just in the political sphere, but especially amongst young people. A customer of ours was interested in a key performance indicator for their business of increasing how frequently people were combating cyberbullying inside of one of their smartphone apps. And by working with them to find an action, like sending a positive message to another one of their friends anonymously, we were able to reinforce it here with selectively showing and hiding a series of motivational quotes shown here in fuchsia. Note that we didn't bribe them. We didn't give them $10. We didn't offer them a Lamborghini. By just very carefully and predictably controlling when and how they were made to feel a little bit better than baseline, we were able to drastically increase the frequency of how often people would come back to this app and spread positivity. From the StratCom perspective then, what might it mean to have this type of capacity to then go and, in real time and person to person, shape how they're responding to rhetoric, shape how they're responding to news, and persuade and encourage them through these uses of positivity for the types of behaviors that are strategically aligned. Increasing financial solvency and the ability to have a thriving financial life worldwide is a goal, of course, and that's felt nowhere more than in sub-Saharan Africa, where fortunately, because of advances in their technology, they've leapfrogged a lot of landline technologies, and the majority of their banking person-to-person is conducted over their mobile phones, their feature phones even. Through the company Tala, known as Mpoko in Kenya, we were able to show a 14% improvement in how often people would pay back microloans early, just by releasing, at very careful timing and variable ratio, when and how the system would thank them positively beyond just a neutral acknowledgement of the receipt of their payment. From this perspective then, when we think about the types of things that NATO would be interested in, or that governments who are member agencies or member states would be interested in, how might we shape how people are contributing in online conversations, given that we now have a powerful, rigorous technology for influencing and persuading people to do the things we would like them to do? How might this consider how they respond to what we can clearly identify as fake news, or as we are trying to transition out of there being ambiguity about the status of news as being verifiable or not, and into a world where people already automatically have the habit of doing a sort of sense check on whether or not this is true? How do we instill that habit? How might variable reinforcement and optimized persuasive AI engender that kind of change to get people to start checking to see if something was true or not? How does this shape what the future of warfare looks like, to the extent that one of the greater global trends in warfare over the past 1,000 years has been the decrease in mortality through a better control of behavior and precision? How does this work with things like human trafficking or sexual trafficking, in which we're looking at some of the remaining tasks globally on Western consensus and liberal democratic values, that we can better understand and predictively change how people are responding to what they see in their community? These are all behaviors, amongst many more, that states are interested in. And what I propose to you today is that we are entering now an era of a technology of behavior. This is becoming as much a design task as in previous generations finding the right words and pictures was for propaganda. Only now it's personalized and predictive for each person uniquely. Though it does not come without a word of caution. Who here has read the book on the right? Who here has read the book on the left? That's usually the ratio we get. In America, at least, every young person is made to read Orwell, is made to read Huxley, though the Huxley we read is not Island, but rather Brave New World. And it's a shame, because it's clear now that we're not going as much, at least in the West, towards a Orwellian dystopia as maybe we're going towards a Huxleyan dystopia, though Huxley cannot be remembered just for being a dystopian author. Island was his book of utopia, in which the same techniques of mass surveillance, the same techniques of persuasion, the same techniques of the use of mind-altering substances to have better spirituality, all of these things that were used to suppress the human condition in Brave New World, instead were used to uplift the human condition and encourage human flourishing in Island. My message for you here today is that we are entering this world of a technology of behavior. My challenge to you is to make sure that we end up at the Island and not in Brave New World. You are NATO. You have the asymmetrical just use of force. You have a lot at stake here, and you can do it. We need to make sure together how, as we look at a behavior that can be engineered, members of institutions like mine, or like Marina's, who operate perhaps in the private sector, can act as allies to enhance these types of goals and make sure we end up at something closer to the Island than a Brave New World. And I will say that the states who start doing this first, and the agencies and organizations that start doing this first, will exhibit a bit of first mover advantage. What this means ethically then is, as we move forward, there's a challenge to make sure we can innovate quickly here, make sure we can align this strategically with what the goals of StratCom may be to enable this better sense of getting towards what we need out of Western democracy and the Western consensus. Because if we don't move quickly, the parties for whom we find ourselves competing with are adversarial may move as well, because you cannot put this knowledge back in boxes. And I'm not the only person who knows this. We're not the only conference talking about this. But it is my goal to be able to share with you that we have a lot of optimism, that we can use these for good, that we can use these to encourage the types of human flourishing. And I'm very excited to explore that future with you. So thank you very much.